I had what many people would call a warped childhood. Many children are raised under nursery rhymes, fairy tales, and Dr. Seuss. While my childhood did have these memories, my mother included a few of Virginia in mind, and my sister's upbringing horror. I cannot count the number of times when my sister and I were spending some Stephen King short stories for bedtime and rather more common children's stories. Popsy was my always favorite. I grew up watching the classic horror movies and being told ghost stories. Many people, when I tell them this, to ask me if I had gotten nightmares as a child as a result, but truth is quite the opposite. I was not afraid of the boogeyman or ghosts. To me, ghosts and goblins were simply just fictional no, creatures that were only in books, movies, and in stories told around a campfire. The horror genre was simply a short part of life. I loved the feeling of being scared, so naturally Halloween was one of my favorite times of the year. I remember that one Halloween many years ago. I was young, but not so young that I didn't have first-hand memories of that event soon to follow. There was a Halloween attraction that was running just down the street from my house. It had been going on every Halloween for a few years, but my parents had never let me or my sister go before. And then one year, we finally given permission to go to this haunted attraction. The attraction was built into an old and abandoned manor house. It was just one of those places where you could expect a Halloween attraction to be built. I remember being very excited when I waited to get into the house because a lot of people were coming out raving about how scary it was, and I was highly anticipating having my own time inside. Unlike most Halloween attractions, they let the people inside in the house in small groups. Because my sister and I were only children, the attendants at the door made sure that we were put in the same group as our parents. Finally, we stepped inside. Inside, it could have been any haunted house in America in the 90s, full of fake frogs, grease-painted actors. I wasn't overly scared, because my mother always reminded me that the actors are not allowed to touch you. But I jumped and screamed along with everyone else, and when a monster jumped out of the hidden nooks and crannies of the old manor house. Eventually we made our way down to the basement, to which it had been changed into the stereotypical mad direct doctor setting in the common that a lot of haunted houses. Needless to say, there was a lot of fake blood everywhere, but I'll never forget the basement, because something just seemed a little out of place. Sometimes even in the most normal things can be diabolical if you alter the perspective. It's something that you see in a few modern ghost hunting shows and B-shots. There was nothing immediately jumped out as being evil. There was certainly nothing like The Exorcist happening to tip me off something that was wrong. It was a simple sight, but it made much more unnerving because it stood out against the overall horror backdrop of the decorated room. In the midst of the bloody carnage of the mad doctor's operating room, I remember that old woman was sitting in the far corner of the room. She looked to be in her 80s and had thinning gray hair and was very thin. I would be lying to myself if I had said that she didn't jump scare me more than the rest of the attraction combined. At the time I didn't have very much understanding of the effects of the different physical alignments that I have on the person. But looking back now, I would say that she was a victim of a bad stroke. Sometimes a bad stroke will leave one person with one side of his or her face paralyzed, and that's exactly what had happened to her. On one side of her face was dropping saliva and leaking the corner of her drooped mouth. She was talking, yelling at us as we passed by her. Her words badly slurred because of her paralyzed face, but I could make out what she was yelling. "Stop! Get out!" over and over again. Even passing through the basement and going out the other side, I could hear her screaming in that awful slurred up way the stairs. As I got extremely disturbed by the sight of the old woman, but as I got away from her, I began to feel better. She was obviously an actor who was working for the attraction. Most of the attraction worked on jump scares, and she was obviously there to cater more of the psychological horror. Well, in my case, it certainly worked. It certainly worked on me. We merged down into the night once again and got the instant sense of relief that makes horror so addicting that we had survived moment. My sister instantly began to talk about which part was her favorite. An actor that jumped out of her in a werewolf costume had been her favorite. When it came to my turn to share, I could think of nothing but besides the old woman I seen. I told my family about how the old woman was in the basement had scared me the most. "What old woman in the basement, Ashley?" my mother asked. Shocked, I began to describe her as well as what I could see, and then when I had finished, my mother said that she had not seen any woman fitting that description down in the basement. The rest of my family agreed with her. I put the incident out of my head. Like I said, I didn't believe in the ghosts, and I didn't believe that they were real. I tried to rationalize what she had missed in the whole woman and her screams. Each attempt to do this was more pathetic than the last, but at least that ghosts can't be real. The next year, I was eager to step foot in the old manor again, but I was horrified to discover that it was a haunted attraction, had been shut down and would not be opening again. Since I lived so close to the haunt, a few people in my neighborhood had taken up the jobs there. I asked to look around with them about why they had closed. The few people that would talk to me said that the old manor house was really haunted with real ghosts, and that too many people were refusing to work there again because of the paranormal activity going on there. Their stories range from objects moving on their own to apparitions and even to physical attacks against the living that had entered certain parts of the house. I laughed it off. People were just letting the atmosphere of the Halloween haunt mess with them. It was probably just a couple of pranksters messing with the workers. But no matter how much I tried to explain about the workers of how it could be just a couple of jokers messing around, they kept insisting that it was impossible for it to be any human activity. But even as I tried to convince them, I couldn't help but remember the old woman I had seen in the basement and no one else had seen. I was kind of nervous about the whole thing, and I wanted more information about the house. These days you can look up anything on the internet and have an answer in seconds, but the 90s was not like that. A few people had internet at the time, and my family was one that did not have internet access. So I went to my best thing, my mother. I asked her about the old manor house. At first she was reluctant to tell me, which unnerved me even more than anything, since she never shied away from telling us the natures before. Finally she told me what she knew. The manor started out as a private residence built in 1922, but the original owner lost the house in foreclosure. After that came a sanatorium, to which is something like a small hospital. Just the virtue of being a hospital in the area, and it was the only hospital around at the time. A lot of people passed away within the walls. In fact, there are some reports that say that there was at least one death a day within those walls during this time. But that wasn't even the part that my mom was reluctant to tell me. She told me that afterwards, it was turned into a nursing facility, and they would have taken care of sick older people, just like the old woman I had seen during my walkthrough. But the records of the abuse that came out of that place were numerous. Many ex-employees confessed that they quit soon, even after being hired, because of the vast amount of malpractice that happened there. My mother remembered all this because it was in the newspapers when it was going on, and it was a huge deal in the community. It made me feel a little sick to my stomach about thinking how those people, those human beings, were threatened to be in that horrible place. And that's not all. Logical legend said that the building was haunted and tortured by the souls of people who were buried under the horrible conditions here. The man who had built it on Halloween attraction there knew of the history and legends surrounding the place and built the attraction with the sole purpose of playing out these stories. It was then that I knew that I seen the ghost of the woman who had died in the building. She just wanted to spend her afterlife in peace, but instead every year, and her fellow ghosts were interrupted by the living storming through their place like in thousands, turning the situation into a joke. And for the first time ever, I began to treat ghosts and spirits as fictional characters, only meant to be frightened and scare. But that real physical manifestation, a force that humans were not capable of understanding yet. To this house and to this day, it still continues to be a hot spot for our paranormal activity. The owner lets in a local paranormal group at least once a week, every Friday night, to do an investigation. Several ghost-themed television shows have been filmed at the location. One show brought a psychic medium who claims that the years that the house has spent as a Halloween attraction has forever scared the house and the spirits who reside there. One thing is know for sure that I'm now more careful about checking out the history of any Halloween haunt I had to go to. But of course, ghosts are everywhere. But of course, I will never go to that place with such a sad history attached to it. And I haven't been able to get inside scared since that one Halloween attraction since. I don't scream, jump, or run away as actors jump out at me. Nearly all of my friends have commented my bravery in the face of these Halloween attractions. But I'm not brave, not really. Just a lack of fear. Because it's hard to get scared by actors in makeup when you've seen inside the real thing.